It's Saturday night in Minsk. A group of young pro-democracy activists have broken onto the roof of one of the Soviet-style tower blocks that surround the city. It's 12 stories high and it's minus 17 degrees. If they get caught, they could end up in prison. If they get caught with us, foreign journalists, their fate is sealed. They're here to hoist the white, red and white flag that's become the symbol of Belarusian resistance to the man dubbed Europe's last dictator, Alexander Lukashenko.
Why are you doing all of this?
Потому что я хочу, чтобы в нашей стране был мир, спокойствие, были правильные выборы, честные, чтобы наконец-то успокоились, чтобы перестали избивать людей, чтобы перестали судить за вымышленные преступления, перестали хватать на улицах людей, которые просто мирно выходят, просто погулять.
As well as an act of protest, they're doing this to welcome home a friend about to be released from prison. She's just one of what the UN estimate to be over 27,000 people arrested since the mass protests began in the summer last year. What does what's happening on this roof tell us about the big picture? Winter and the regime's clampdown have put paid to the mass street protests for now. But also thousands have felt the pain of loved ones detained. The act of political protest has become personal.
Живе Belarus!
The presidential elections in August, which Lukashenko won, were widely considered to have been rigged. Cue the biggest street demonstrations of their kind in Belarus. 3 women emerged as the leaders of the opposition umbrella group, the Coordination Council. Then they were arrested or fled. They weren't alone. Thousands were detained, people were tortured, and there were credible claims of killings. A textbook quell from a man who had done it before. So for now, protesters have gone indoors, or in this case, got into our car.
I think that all of us can end up in prison, at Volодарsko, for instance.
So there is risk here for you?
And for you too.
Many of this young woman's friends have been arrested. She had to leave her job because the state-run institution she worked for made it impossible for her to stay. A classic Soviet-era tactic: careers meet coercion. The first stop on our city tour.
The so-called Square of Change. In Russian we call it Площадь Перемен, and there is nothing conspicuous about it. There was, actually, until November, when Roman Bondarenko was killed.
For a time, the square became the focal point of opposition, but unbeknownst to us, now the focal point of a large police presence. Put the camera down the floor.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Putting the camera down on the ground because there's police everywhere now.
It's unusual to have these police cars and police in such peaceful neighborhood in Minsk, but
Yeah.
you know it's happening for apparent reasons.
On the 11th of November, during the protests, a young artist called Roman Bondarenko was beaten up in the square. He was dragged into a minibus and later died of brain injuries. He'd served in the army. His attackers are believed to be connected to the state. It's impossible to gauge the level of Lukashenko's support in a country where reliable polling is hard to come by. What we can say, what happened on the Square of Change and other places offended most Belarusians' sense of decency.
Maria Kolesnikova is being held at the prison at the moment.
In this prison?
Yes.
Volодарskova prison in the city centre is where Maria Kolesnikova, one of the 3 leaders of the movement, is now being held. We last met her during the summer, before she was jailed. This time round, we meet her dad. The prison allows just some of her letters to be sent out to him. Again, this is personal. Not a case of like father, like daughter, a case of a father forged in the Soviet system who wants to be like his daughter.
К сожалению, видимо, и прошлые годы, они оставили отпечаток это образ мыслей в голове. То есть, прежде всего, свобода будет тогда, когда в голове у тебя будет свобода. А пока ее нету. Но я стараюсь быть похожим на свою дочь.
Alexander speaks very tenderly about both his daughters, as children and as adults. He becomes emotional talking about his wife, their mother, who passed away just 2 years ago. The koala bear is a sort of family talisman, a mother and 2 babies. This is a man not afraid to talk about his feelings, and mention the name of Lukashenko, his face hardens.
Он обидел всех, весь народ, я считаю. И вот это ему не простят. И здесь не обо мне речь. Я готов всегда прощать, но только тогда, когда человек в этом признается. Он не хочет ничего признавать.
Our final stop, the neighbourhood of Malinovka. Word reaches us of a flash demo. Later this week, Lukashenko will hold a huge jamboree for his allies across society called the People's Assembly, an attempt to demonstrate national togetherness. This is one locality's riposte. The opposition has called for strikes, unlikely to materialise, and mass demonstrations, which may or may not, to coincide with the assembly. The regime's influence is knitted into the DNA of this country, but the violent crackdown last year is altering that DNA.
It's less headline-grabbing than the summer's protests, but these neighbourhood protests are potent nonetheless, because they are in a state, it is community-based.
But, as we've seen, it's also deeply personal. And the self-proclaimed man of the people would do well to remember that.
Well, earlier I spoke to Professor Elena Korosteleva, who is Chair of International Politics at Kent University and is herself from Belarus. I asked her whether Belarus has entered a new phase of protests.
Indeed, it is a new phase, but it is a qualitatively different new phase in a sense that it has become localized forms of resistance. And in my opinion, it is becoming even more powerful because of that. If you think about localized forms of resistance, when people actually get together in their neighborhoods, in their supolnost in Belarusian, it means that, first of all, they get to know each other much better. They can then draw on support infrastructures of their local communities. It's kind of building that self-reliance, self-governance, bottom up. But it is also very difficult to control externally in terms of police involvement.
Can I ask you what the Navalny effect is, given that he has returned to Russia, he's in prison? What effect is that having on the movement inside Belarus?
I think it's very reciprocal in many ways, because I can see there is a lot of solidarity growing between the Belarusian protest movement, but also the Russian protest movement. You can say that actually there is a Belarusian effect on the growing Russian movement, but on the other hand, the fact that actually that movement is now spreading across so many Russian cities and towns, it also mobilizes Belarusian to continue what they've started 6 months ago.
What about the Biden effect? What are you hoping for from the new administration in America?
There is a great hope that with Biden administration and also the new American ambassador coming to Belarus, there will be change and there will be more pressure put on the Belarusian regime. There is also hope that there is some form of a strategy, especially in terms of how Biden administration, together with European embassies and institutions, how they can also work together with the Coordination Council and Svetlana Tikhanovskaya in particular in order to support and sustain change in Belarus.
Professor Korosteleva, thank you very much indeed for talking to us.
Thank you.